So TFD dropped another 5 component sets last week, bringing some new set bonuses and even opening up some more build variety with some of the stronger 2 set bonuses that we've seen so far. But the one question on everyone's mind is, how good are they, and more importantly, will any of these dethrone Slayer as the go-to set for skill builds? So in today's video we'll be taking a closer look at the brand new Plague set, catering towards toxic descendants and adding a crazy boost to their skill damage. Just how good is it? Do the numbers back it up? Well, that's what we'll be diving into in this video for both the numbers and the DPS on that of Freyna and Keelan, and then ask ourselves, is it a must-have for both? As always, we've got a lot to cover, so if all that sounds good to you, then let's get to it. Now before we get into any of the deep dive in terms of the numbers or anything like that, let's start talking about what sets we looked at, how we made it into a controlled environment and how we did our testing. Now the main sets that we are going to be having a look at here are going to be the main 3, so that's going to be Slayer, Distorted Resolve as well as the Plague set. And in terms of the controlled elements, that meant that we can't use things like Secret Garden because this can trigger things like pest stacks. So therefore we wanted to be able to keep the numbers consistent across the board, so therefore any additional ways to be able to boost up our skill power or our damage had to be taken out. This also meant that we had to reset our inversion reinforcement back down to level 0, so we did manage to do that, so there was no capstones or anything like that like triggering in the background. Then we also made sure to use the same reactor across all the builds for a single descendant, so that meant that we are using a toxic and tech, the exact same toxic and tech reactor across the board for every single one of Freyna's builds. And then when it comes to Keelan, we will be just purely looking at one build, but that is going to be using the same reactor across all that. And then we also made sure that that was mounted, so that meant that we did have to hold the correct weapon. In this case, we were going to be using Greg's Reverse Fate because that is also a tactical rifle, so that does work quite nicely. And then lastly, when it comes to the enemy, we did make sure that it is the exact same level 1 invincible enemy across every single one of the tests, so therefore we didn't have anything like just like funny weird resistances like kicking up in between like different enemies or anything like that. We made sure that was consistent across the board as well. So kicking things off, let's start taking a look at the first of the builds for Freyna, and that is going to be the farming build using the Red Contagion mod to be able to help us with spreading around that room 0 trauma. Now this one does kind of rely on being able to increase the amount of DPS that we can do, and the reason why is because we are losing out on additional multipliers when it comes to damage over time, like things like Panic and Nightmare, so missing out on those like huge damage multipliers that are going to be triggering all the time that we'll see in the other builds means that we kind of need to rely on that room 0 trauma hitting as hard as possible. Now when it comes to the 3 sets for this one, because it is a 1 HP build, Distorted Resolve is going to be offering us pretty much nothing here apart from the fact that it does have max HP rolls, so therefore Distorted is pretty much out the window. That just leaves us with Slayer and Plague, and while Slayer is still pretty good, Plague is a 10% boost to the amount of DPS that we can do across the board, which means that our projectiles, our puddles, our room 0 trauma, and everything else that we can kind of like chuck out is going to be doing more across the board. We also found that being able to go into your special weapon as well, your unique side of things with your skill 4, every single one of those bullets is going to be doing 10% more damage as well, which is fantastic at being able to deal some really nice damage to like the bosses, the elites and everything like that. That's just a little bit too stubborn to be able to die from the room 0 trauma. So in the case of the farming build, I absolutely do recommend that you do go for the Plague set over that of Slayer, and it does have so many more bonuses going for it. Being able to have max HP rolls on every single one of the component pieces is already fantastic in terms of the amount of sustain that you can have, but the fact that it doesn't have any additional skill cost tied to the amount of skill power that we can kind of like chuck out means that it is going to be pretty much just head and shoulders above that of the Slayer set. Now we are going to see a very common theme just kind of like happening for the rest of the build, but we do want to kind of like talk about the DPS mobbing side of things because this is a 1 HP deathless build, so therefore you'd expect that Distorted Resolve would start coming into its own. The weird thing is that Distorted Resolve used to be pretty good. I'm pretty sure that Distorted ended up being better than that of the Slayer set at one point, but for whatever reason, like the changes that it's just kind of like gone through means that it's actually the worst set going forward, so therefore I would never really recommend Distorted Resolve to any kind of person at this moment in time. It's just not offering you anything in comparison to the amount of DPS that you can do, and it's already been beaten out in terms of DPS and sustained by that of the Plague set, so therefore Distorted Resolve is just kind of lost out. That does mean that Slayer and Plague are fantastic for the DPS mobbing side of things, but once again it is a 10% DPS boost across the board when it comes to Plague against that of Slayer, so therefore every single one of those multipliers that you're going to have, so that is going to include your Panic, including your DK and your Nightmare and everything like that, you are going to see more damage across the board by going into Plague instead of going into Slayer. Now, the last of the 3 builds that I did want to talk about for Freyna is going to be the Speedy Poison build, and this is going to be my current favourite go-to, and therefore, once again, it is the exact same story across the board. Distorted is going to be offering you pretty much basically nothing. Slayer is still going to be the middle ground and is still a fantastic set to go for, but Plague is once again a 10% DPS boost across the board for everything that Speedy Poison can do. So to summarise everything that we've just talked about, if you are planning on being able to rock Freyna anytime soon, I highly recommend that you head yourself over to the Broken Boundary and find yourself out a fantastic Plague set so you can start squeezing out all that nice DPS goodness. So now that we've covered everything to do with Freyna, let's start having a look into Keelan and seeing as to how we can benefit from the component set as well. Now, Keelan does have one additional benefit going in his way for using the Plague set, and that's the fact that he does have a special resource bar that he can tack into when it comes to some of his skills. Now, by tacking into that and being able to actually gain some resource, you will just trigger the additional benefit of that of the Plague set, so you will get additional skill power, meaning that your abilities are going to hit that much harder. Now, before we start talking about some of the numbers, I do just kind of want to add a caveat here that some of the testing was very difficult to be able to get right when it comes to actually using some of these abilities. The reason why is because when it comes to the Plague set, when you activate some of your skills, it's kind of behaves a little bit weird and a little bit different in terms of like when you get the boost to your skill power to affect your amount of damage. So in some cases it was really easy to be able to get like different numbers, and then in some cases it was almost like the additional skill power triggered and then the amount of damage happened. So it's really difficult to be able to get the pre-state as to what damage you can actually do. So just take this with a pinch of salt. I do have the Slayer against the Plague set. I did drop Distorted Resolve because Distorted Resolve we aren't using a 1 HP build. So therefore, it just wasn't worth being able to actually show that compared to what we've actually just kind of like talked about. But I did try to show Slayer against Plague and then also Plague with the bonus as a separate line. So I've tried to do that where I could and where possible so you can get an idea as to how much of a difference this is actually offering. So now that we've covered that out of the way, let's start having a look at the numbers. So I'm going to be flashing all the damage calculations up on screen right now, and just to kind of like summarize, what I did notice is that if you just purely compare Plague to that of Slayer, so similar to like how we did with Freyna, this is roughly a 10 to 15% difference in terms of DPS, so Plague is still fantastic and is definitely the go-to, but if you then start activating the bonus and then start triggering all your skills on top of that, it then ups itself to around about an 18 to 25% difference with the boost, which is absolutely huge. So therefore, Keelan is just becomes an absolute DPS monster. He was already a monster with Slayer set, but now he's getting an extra up to 25% difference in terms of the amount of damage that he can deal. It is kind of nutty. It is a lot of damage that he can kind of like chuck out with the Plague set, and the fact that he now has the sustain to be able to go like combine with his actual playstyle of chucking himself into enemy fire and things like that. The Plague set is fantastic for Keelan. It cannot be overstated as to how good this actually is, and I highly recommend that if you are a Keelan main, you absolutely do want a Plague set, and you will be seeing some real nice damage numbers come your way. So there was one skill that I did want to kind of like focus on just to give you an idea as to how much extra damage you can chuck out when it comes to swapping from Slayer to the Plague set, and that is actually going to be his skill 4, which is going to be Tremor. And if you manage to get this up to 5 stacks, you will be getting an additional multiplier of 4.2 thousand every single time that you add an additional stack on there. If you are at Slayer and using this against the exact same enemy, keep in mind this is a level 1 enemy, so obviously these numbers aren't going to fully translate to like proper content and everything like that. But at max stacks, this does hit for just over 20.1 million, whereas if you just swap over to the Plague set and nothing else is changed, you will be dealing 23.1 mil, and the fact that that is a 3 mil difference just in terms of like damage calculations is insane. I don't think there's ever really been too much of a difference change that we've seen anything like this before, and therefore Plague is absolutely fantastic. It is absolutely the best in slot for Keelan, and I highly recommend that you do get yourself a nice set just for that bonus alone. So to summarize everything that we've just kind of like talked about, yes, Plague set is the best one to be able to go for, and it does work for both of the Descendants. So you absolutely want to be able to use this over your Slayer set, and it is just going to be helping you out in quality of life. In terms of sustain, it's going to be helping you out in DPS. It's just helping you out in every single good way that's possible, and therefore the Plague set is just an absolute boost over that of the Slayer set. But with all that out of the way, that wraps it up for the breakdown of the Plague set, offering anywhere between a 10 to 18% boost for both Descendants over that of Slayer, with Keelan going even further beyond due to his custom resource, triggering that extra skill power on the set. So if you're a Freyna or a Keelan main, it is an absolute no-brainer to farm out a set of these, which you can eventually get from farming Broken Boundary in that of the Sigma sector. Killing both of the bosses means you'll get 2 pieces per completed run, so it probably will take you a few tries to be able to get the items and rolls that you need. But this is a section I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the latest update? How do you feel about the new component sets in-game? And lastly, how far are you into the new Purge Challenge levels? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. As I always say, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves well. I'll see you all on the next video.